はい、それではちょっとまだ皆さん集まっていないようではありますけれども、時間になりましたので、これからですね、デジタル化する世界における緊急援助と題した、ディスカッション、カンバセーションのセッションを始めたいと思います。まずはじめに、今日はですね、国連人道問題担当事務次長補のジョイス・ムシアさんにお越しをいただきまして、でそれからあとは国際協力機構国際緊急援助隊事務局の飯村学事務局長にもお越しいただきました。でこのお二人本当に忙しい中お時間をですね割いてくださいまして、でムシアさんも外務省やそれから JICA との打ち合わせ等々がある中でお時間をいただきました。それから飯村さんには明日からオンフィールドのトレーニングというかエクササイズをやる直前の準備のお忙しい中お越しいただきまして本当にありがとうございました。でそれから、一橋大学のグローバルオンライン教育センターで講師を務めている中谷澄江先生ですけれども、中谷先生が今回このですねイベントを中心になって企画してもらいました。でこのお題というか趣旨ですけれども、現在いろいろなところで、紛争であったりとか自然災害が起きて、緊急援助を必要としている人というのは増えてきております。でそうした中で我々はどのようにこうした人たちの支援をですね、実施することができるのかというのは喫緊の課題でありますけれども、それに加えて例えば気候変動であったりとか、それからさまざまな要因が紛争あるいはこうした緊急援助を招く事態ですね、災害を複雑化させている。でそうした問題に対処するために我々は今あるテクノロジーをどのように効果的に使うのか、とりわけ今デジタル化するその世界の中でこうした振興技術をですね、よりその支援を効果的にするためにどういうふうに応用したらいいんだろうかということを考えるべき時ではないかというふうに思っております。で今回のですね対話はこうしたテーマをもとにして、進めさせていただきたいと思いますけれども、同時に今ここに来てくれている若い人たちがですね、国際社会に目を向けて、そして人類共通の善のためにどんな貢献ができるのか、その中で自分は何ができるのかなということを一緒に考えてもらって、できれば将来的にはそうしたですね、フィールドでキャリアを積んでもらえるようなその考えを持っていただけたらいいなというふうに思っております。この今日の進め方ですけれども、まずは、ムシア事務次長補からですね、少し短いですけれども、15分ぐらいのリードオフのですね、スピーチをいただきまして、その後飯村事務局長から JICA のですね、この国際緊急援助大事務局の取り組みをご紹介いただきます。でその後に中谷先生から、今回のテーマについてのどういうお題かということについて少し解説をいただいて、その後に私が司会をさせてもらって、皆さんとですねディスカッションを進めていきたいと思っています。で特にムシアさんはぜひ皆さんの話を聞きたいということでもおっしゃっておりましたので、なるべく活発なディスカッションをインタラクティブに進めていければというふうに思いますので、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。それでは早速ですけれども、ムシアさんに、どうぞ最初のスピーチをお願いできればと思います。Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Masa, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, all the participants. I know you are very busy and most of you had to travel to come here, so I wanted to express on behalf of the United Nations, but also the humanitarian community, my team, deep appreciation for making the time. I am going to be, I think the professor was very kind to give me 15 minutes, but what I find extremely useful is actually to have an interactive discussion. So you can ask me anything, and I'm sure you have seen my background, which I'll speak a little bit before I get into my remarks. But let me also recognize the presence of a friend of humanitarian community, Mr. Imura, who works for JICA, and we work very, very closely with them, especially on disasters response. When there is an earthquake, Japan has been very, very kind and generous through JICA, but also through Ministry of Foreign Affairs to support our work. So I really want to appreciate the government of Japan, but also Mr. Imura for all that you do to support us. And of course, Professor Akiyama of Hitotsubashi University. I did a lot of research about this university because I find at some point in my life I used to be you as a student. So I'm still a student, and I learned a lot about this university, which I'll speak about, especially on the role of innovation, technology, and what the center is trying to do. Really delighted to meet Assistant Professor Nakaya as well, and I look forward to learning from her. Now, let me get to my remarks first, and then we can have a conversation. For me, it is such a pleasure. I'm only here in Japan for, sadly, 4 days or so. Then I go back to New York. Every time I come to Japan, I don't seem to have enough time. But every time I come, I make sure I engage with students. Why? Because if you look at the world today, and Japan is, in addition to being one of the top donors to humanitarian financing, but it's a strong supporter of multilateralism. The United Nations, as some of you know, have 190 member states. So when we speak about multilateralism, when all nations come just like this and they have the same voice, the reason why I'm so proud and humbled to work at the United Nations, it's because of all the nations are represented, no matter the state of development. I've also spent 20 years, for those who have read my bio, of wonderful career at the World Bank Group, both in Washington, but also I lived in this region as well, and then I worked on environment, and now I work in the humanitarian. If I think of the future, and I'm a mother of two young adults, 25 and 21, my youngest is at university, but if you think about the future is about one of unity. If you look at most of the problems today, they are man-made. Whether it's because of geopolitics or conflict or climate, they are man-made. So the role of technology, of innovation, and especially your generation, because you know more than my generation when it comes to the use of technology for the goodness, is extremely, extremely, extremely important. So what I hope is, after this conversation, you will be inspired by what I'm going to say, in terms of taking informed risks for the sake of making the world a better place. I have traveled a lot through my work from Syria, Yemen, Democratic Republic of Congo, Colombia, and many other places. And I've learned one thing. We as human beings, we actually have more in common than in difference. If you ask a Japanese family, mother, father, community, what do they want? It's peace, it's good health, it's unity for the community. It is the same thing that I've heard from internally displaced people, refugees, and very poor people that I've had to interact with. So for me, it's a special honor to speak at this very prestigious university that has, as I've learned, such a long history of service both inside and outside of Japan. As you know very well, better than me, Hitottsubashi's founding mission was to nurture, and I quote, the captains of industry that would go out there on to lead the Japanese nation into an era of rapid modernization and development. And just look outside, when you walk outside Tokyo, and the story of Japan and its modernization and its lift from the ashes of war and poverty to now every place I travel. I was in Africa recently. You see a JICA, Japanese assistance, that is doing better for others. So this university, as captains of industry, has clearly left a mark, not just here, but also abroad. 150 years later, and the fruits of this captain of industry vision lie all around you. Japan, a country of bullet trains, advanced industry, and groundbreaking technology, is well known globally, even up to today. But I'm equally impressed by these universities as I was studying the determination to reach beyond Japan's borders and to contribute to the growth of free and peaceful societies around the world. But I recognize this would not have happened if it was not for an enlightened and visionary leadership of the universities who came before the current leaders. And that's why, for me, when I was looking at options, just coming and speaking to you as the next generation of industry leaders who can build resilient, peaceful, and a much more just societies for the future, leveraging technology and innovation. I was motivated by the opportunity. Now, having been around also, I get a lot of questions, what keeps me going? What keeps me going when I go to Yemen and very, very tough places, and I travel, and sometimes even my team has to negotiate for the roads for me to pass through because there may be bombs or mines on the street. What keeps me going is to leave a mark, to say I have tried in my life to make something better, make the world a better place. And there's nothing more special as a legacy that one, I believe, human beings, particularly you, can actually do. Look at your beautiful country, but also look at the possibilities that you have, even your parents did not have. You may take for granted whether it's the YouTube channels, but when I was growing up in Tanzania, we didn't have YouTube channels. We didn't have all the technology that your generation has. So think about what you can actually do using technology for good. So we are going to need all new ways to find more of this kind of solidarity that this university is known for. And I want to give you one example from one of my travels, which was quite enlightened. I traveled to an East Southern African country called Mozambique. And it's a very long country near South Africa. And the capital is in Maputo, in the southern tip of Mozambique. Mozambique is known to have every year around October a natural disaster, climate change, cyclones, they hit every October. And Mozambique is not as rich as Japan. And we were there together with our partners, and I visited JICA office as well. And one of the things I heard from the government was how they're utilizing drone technology to actually monitor weather patterns before the cyclone hits the coast of Mozambique. So, and then they use smartphone to send messages to communities, including in rural areas, to tell them you need to move away from the danger zones. And I asked them, where did they learn from that? And they said from watching TV and news about how Japan actually prepares for earthquake and the use of technology. But more importantly, it's the capacity of using drone technology. One, they started off by early warning by monitoring signs and change weather patterns. But through that technology, they also use the same drone to deliver medicines as part of immunizations in some of the most remote areas that before roads and trucks used to travel. So that just gives you an example. If you step back and think about natural disasters caused by especially climate change, which we're seeing more and more globally, but also delivering of basic services such as healthcare in rural parts, in countries that are not as wealthy as Japan. So for me, there is more to be explored as we are looking more and more at AI, at the drone technology. Of course, technology has its own good and bad, but on the bad side, the sovereign countries can actually come up with compliance and regulation. But I see opportunities to actually do a leapfrog, whether it's from the development side, but also from the humanitarian side, to find ways to mitigate potential risks when it comes to disasters. So now, the other question I always get is, what does it take to be in international arena? What does it take for you eventually to become the leaders, even above the title that I have, and take the Japan flag outside? I've learned a couple of things. One is a lot of what I learned, I was trained as a biochemist actually. I used to work in a lab and do experiments, science, and published quite a few papers. And then I realized I was actually hungry to make a difference in people's life, in addition to doing some centrifuge tubes experiments in the lab at that particular time. Now fast forward over 25 or 28 years of experience, I've learned in international development, you need the skills of collaboration, of empathy, of self-understanding, on contemplation. What I really appreciate about organizations such as the World Bank, the United Nations, we all come with own biases, whether I'm Tanzanian or Japanese, my colleague is American and Filipino, and I have a Japanese colleague. The multilateral system has a way to bring the best out of you. For example, the Japanese people are known for hard work, for value system, for family. That is empathy. And when you work in the humanitarian sector, it is about empathy, of thinking something bigger than yourself. So my advice to you would be cognitive development and technological advancement are vital. They're vital, just like innovation. But when you look at most of the global problems, they require multi-sectoral, interconnected solutions. And that requires the ability to integrate feelings, the ability to integrate values and emotions with cold and hard facts, because you need evidence-based way of operating if we really want to solve today's problems, whether it's climate change, whether it's conflict, whether it is any problem that you are looking at today. So listen, my advice to you would be listen to as many people and as many different perspectives as possible. Empathize with others. Always put yourself in other person's shoe. When I go and I have a privileged life living in New York, but when I travel to places like Syria and I hug a mother, I'm a mother, I put myself in that person's shoe. And I think about, wow, my children have a different life because they were born in the US. Imagine if that IDP or refugee had the same privilege that I have. So that empathy, which is part of the Japanese DNA, I know a lot of Japanese friends, their empathy, for family, for elderly people, for community, bring it to the world. And second, be authentic. Most of us, when you climb up, you lose yourself. But there's something goodness of what makes you. So bring that to yourself and do not change no matter where you work. I've worked in Africa, I've worked in Canada, in the US, in China, in South Korea, and I traveled everywhere. But what has been constant in the equation called Joyce is my values. Values of integrity, of hard work, and of serving others before myself. So be authentic and don't compromise your integrity. Have the courage to say what you think, but also the flexibility to change your mind. Because when you live in beautiful Tokyo, you go even to New York is not Tokyo. But then the opportunity when you're in New York is to reflect on the goodness of Tokyo and to say, what can you learn from what New York offers? So be flexible in your thinking, and that requires a very different way of thinking, but also it requires risks. I'll tell you one of the examples when I first came to live in Asia. I left Washington with my husband and kids. Asia was very different, and my first impression was fear. Am I going to relate to Asian culture? But then I learned through Confucianism, it's a similar culture to what I was brought up with, but different packaging. So be able to challenge your own biases and your own comfort zone. I tell my team all the time, go and do things that make you uncomfortable. My colleague here from JICA, he always reminds me how much he loves Africa. But I know he was the chief in Cote d'Ivoire, in places that are very different from Japan. But that left an impression for him and connection with a different part of the world. And then always challenge yourself in your career, but find a way to find a balance in your life. It's great to work hard, but also play hard as much as you can, because life is short, So whether it's playing hard, meaning spending time with family, or innovating, or disconnecting and think and use your brain despite the technological availability, I would advise you to do that. So these are the bedrock of our societies, and nurturing these spaces as you traveled the world. I would highly encourage you to think of those 3 points that I've shared with you. Now, for those who are thinking of a career in the humanitarian system, don't get discouraged. My daily life, I wake up in the morning, I don't know whether I'm going to get a call from Myanmar because there's a problem, or Ukraine, or Gaza, or Somalia. But what keeps me going is the hope that whatever I do actually is going to save lives, whether it is a person in Myanmar or in any part of the world. What gives me hope is the investments that the Japanese government, for example, and other member states are investing in our work. And the work that we can pick up a call and say, JICA, there's an earthquake in Turkey, can you come and join us? And there is something beautiful about that. So I found across the world, I've learned, and I want to quote here wisdom from somebody in South Africa, philosophy, which says, I am a person through other people. So instead of just thinking about yourself, to also think about other people, not just in Japan, but also grounded on these universities outside. What that means is our well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of others. If you think of the global peace today, one part of the world, the war in Middle East affects oil prices in Japan or in other parts of the world, affects inflation in different parts of the world. So there is interconnectedness between what is happening in one part of the world. And I'm really impressed that the Japanese government has actually put human security as one pillar of their Overseas Development Assistance Charter, because human security encompasses everything: peace, development, humanitarian, but also dignity for people. So I want to leave you with that. My advice is use technology, do not do easy things, explore the world. It's only by doing very, very difficult and different things from what you are used to, that's when you become a better person as a human being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for
very inspiring initial talk. Now, I think I would like to invite Mr. Imura for the introduction of what you're doing, and maybe could you really touch upon how digital technology can help your job as well.
Thank you very much. Dear Madam Msuya, dear professors, dear students, and dear my colleague in front of me, the two of my members here. Thank you very much for coming. And I followed the presentation of Madam Msuya. She took on the big picture and the landscape of the United Nations and her value and heartfelt message and so on. But my presentation will go to a practical aspect. Very sorry to bring you down to the ground. Okay. So I will make a short presentation on JICA and JDR and who am I and so on. To start with just a small presentation by JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency. Yes, the agency of Japanese part of Japanese government which implement official development assistance financed by Japan government of Japan. And myself, my name is Tsutomu Imura, the Director General of the Secretariat of the Japan Disaster Relief Team since 2023. But I've already worked for JICA about 30 years, and my specialty is especially in Africa, especially Francophone countries. And I think the 2/3 of my professional life, I work over the African affairs, and half of those 20 years I was in African continent. And the second specialty would be the emergency management, including the disaster relief. But I was assigned once to the JICA security management department. And thirdly, I was once the recruiter of a new graduate student to JICA and so on. And with this regard, I will make a small comment later on. But actually, I didn't start my professional career by JICA, but before that, I worked for the Japan's Air Self-Defense Force in the Patriot Missile Battalion as a small officer. Because I graduated from my academic study in National Defense Academy, Boei Daigaku in Japanese, and entered in the Kokuji Edai. I did a little bit professional career. After all, I joined JICA. That is my career. On the basis of this background, I will make my small remarks. So I continue a little bit about ODA scheme. So JICA do our activities under the ODA scheme and divided into normally into two: bilateral and multilateral cooperation. That is presented a little bit by Madam Msuya. And the bilateral cooperation is divided into the financial cooperation and technical cooperation only. The financial cooperation that allow the recipient country to construct the infrastructure and so on. And the technical cooperation, we can provide, for example, a Japanese expert to the recipient country, or the training program in Japan, inviting the administrator or the engineers to Japan, and so on. Those cooperation is very typical. And the most famous scheme would be the Seinen Kaigai Kyōryoku, Japan Overseas Cooperation Volunteers and so on. And what we are doing is part of those activities we do at the disaster relief at this moment. Our activity is under the act, individual act, called the Act on Dispatchment of Japan Disaster Relief Team, enacted in 1987. That is the basis of the law. the point is that response to overseas natural disaster and order to dispatch the kind of JDR team, like rescue team and a medical team, order issued by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the role of JICA is a secretariat. And once the order is issued, the JICA has responsibility to assign to dispatch those kind of the team, represented mainly by the rescue team for the urban search and rescue, and the medical team to provide the medical service to the affected people. And the natural disaster, that is also very important. So according to the law I mentioned, our activity is limited to those three kind of the disaster. That is a natural disaster, outbreak of infectious diseases, and man-made disaster. That means oil spill, the gas explosion, and so on. But the conflict-induced crisis, we cannot touch this issue because the other law was stipulated in 1992. Since then, this part is a part of out of our mandate. So that is a small presentation about our activities. On the basis of this, I will develop the discussion today. Anyway, thank you for your attention.
I just want to remind you the second very short introduction of what he's doing. But in the later period, we are going to elaborate more about how their activities are supported by the digital technology and so forth. So Sumie is going to give a bridge between two inspiring presentations and the topic that we are going to address today.
Thank you so much. I am also going to be very brief, but I wanted to give you some taste of what technology, how it can change the way we think about and deliver aid, either for humanitarian operations or disaster relief. And then I'd like to make a few remarks to connect the dots a little bit. But so wonderful to have you and have our speakers. About a year ago, we actually did an event here on crisis mapping. And we had someone from OCHA's Bangkok office, the Humanitarian Data Exchange Program, to start talking about data science and social science that Hitotsubashi is known for, and international relief operations. And today is a big like to have continue the conversation. I'm just going to give you a few examples again of how technology and innovation has been utilized for international aid operations. OCHA is actually, within the UN Secretariat, is the lead on this. What you're seeing on the map here, right, is a humanitarian map. And what you have here is, everyone has a mobile. Everyone has a mobile. And what I mean by that, if you land in Africa, any country in Africa or Asia, Middle East, everyone has a mobile, right? It's such a source of information, and we know that. But how we can use whatever we have, any little assets we have, to improve our lives. So, when the disaster strikes, right, whether it's in Syria or Haiti or Libya, you can actually share information, right, with your mobile phone. And if they can't, let us know either through the short messages or access to the website or just a phone call. And if we have volunteers, digital volunteers sitting on the other side of the planet, getting the information, layering it on a map, and visualize where the hotspots are. That will certainly inform the people who actually have to bring the food and water and convoys into those spots, and let them know where exactly is that, is the priority location. So OCHA was the lead entity within the Secretariat to develop this system, partner with digital volunteers, universities in the US and Europe and Africa. Actually, this system was initially developed in Kenya. Through the partnerships, we have a better information system to know what's happening and where and what. And enter the age of the AI. do the analysis of the maps that you just saw, and I was trying to show that on the screen. But if you have those information, hotspot analysis on the satellite maps, you still do not know exactly how many people are displaced or how many shelters there are in those locations. But now AI can do the quick analysis and calculation of those hotspots. All right. So you have the satellite imagery. And by the way, UN does not have its own satellites. We actually purchase or get images from member states or purchase like in the commercial entities, a global pulse. And right, so then you see that the areas where the tents are. But just from this image, you can't exactly know how many tents there are.
朝鍋チームの仕事管理をしたら、こいつが爆上がりした件、朝菜を使い始めてから、ち。
だけど、こっちに出てこない。Okay, right. So the AI can actually, for the machine learning, they can start capturing the images and do the analysis of the little white squares, that's the tents. Right? And by doing that, you can figure out how many households there are in those camps. And therefore, you can calculate how many trucks of food or water supply that they have to bring in. Yeah. So these are the kinds of tools that are going to revolutionize the way we actually think, design, and plan for assistance. So this is a partnership of the space agencies, the data scientists, the aid practitioners, and the same tools can be used for, Assistant Secretary Msuya just mentioned, the flood protection, right? Where the vulnerable houses are along the rivers, or where the houses have been destroyed because of floods. So you can do the instant calculation of how many people have been infected, how many villages need the food deliveries, and so on and so forth. All right. I'm going to skip the rest of it because I'm conscious of time. But these are, again, some examples that have been already used for aid operations. Right. Look at examples from Japan. You can now turn the cities into the digital twins, meaning the digital replica of twins. So this is a computer algorithm of Shizuoka, for example. Why is it useful? Because you can then not just satellite imagery, but you can have the 3D landscapes of cities and layer information like flood prediction or the rainfall forecast. And you can have better simulations of the flooding that's likely to take place in cities and elsewhere. And these are the technologies that, for example, JICA is now bringing to places like Myanmar or Sri Lanka and in the countries that are vulnerable to floods, so that they can have a better system to prepare. So these are some of the examples that should to bring together some of the initiatives that the Assistant Secretary has mentioned and the JICA is actually implementing, and I'm looking forward to Mr. Ibra's further details on JICA's activities. Right, so we have made some progress in the last 10, 15 years. Remote sensing, the space, satellite imaging cooperation, the analytics to the better forecasting, digital twins. Also, we begin to use blockchain to deliver aid more effectively and efficient manner. And we also have 3D printing of shelters. And Japan, I think, was in 2023 that had the first 3D printed shelters that meet the Japanese very stringent counter-earthquake standards. So I think it's going to be also another ODA assets that would be very useful. Challenges, the question then, so what, we have these amazing tools, but are we better prepared? Are we? And if not, what do we need? How do we take those innovations and digital tools and turn into actual action? From data to action, and that's the place where data scientists and social science meet. And this is why forums like this are going to be very, very critical in the coming years to discuss humanitarian aid operations. We have better tools, but do we have better operations? And if not, what do we need? Conscious of time, so I am going to pass the microphone to Professor Akino, but I want to raise one question for Assistant Secretary General. And here it is. I think that because we know more, or we can learn more with the digital technologies, we know more about what's happening, right? Whether it's Gaza or Ukraine or the flood-affected Mozambique, we know more. But it does not automatically mean that we actually can deliver aid better. And my assumption is that because we have digital tools, because we have more knowledge, we need people on the ground to negotiate and be able to deliver food and water and trucks, so forth. And we can see how difficult it is, right, in places like Gaza. So I'm assuming that we need people who understand data and technology, but also be able to negotiate on the spot, on the ground, with the very difficult people. And that's a human skills, right? It's a mediation skills, it's a communication skills, and so forth. How do we then educate or train people to be able to do both? And I'll end with that.
Thank you very much. So actually, can I add on top of Sumia's question to the Assistant Secretary General? So she is talking about the needs for maybe the skill of negotiation ground. At the same time, if you would like to mobilize the resources, you have to convince political leaders. How should we do that? So maybe can we start discussion, asking you to respond to our questions. And also, Ina-san, I think you have already prepared some kind of introduction about how you use technologies for the rescue. So maybe if you could afterward introduce their activities.
Thank you very much for excellent presentations from my panelists. I learned a lot actually on your slides, and thank you for putting in a nice word for Ocha. Straight to your question on we may know, but we need to negotiate. You're absolutely right. In every context, we are working, let's say Gaza, we have an office of colleagues there. In addition to having negotiation skills, you also need to understand the local context. For example, in Gaza, some of the negotiations required Arabic language. So we needed colleagues, especially national staff, who could speak to authorities in local language. But also there are cultural issues. In the case of Gaza, or even in Yemen, when I went to Yemen, because of Marham, Yemeni women are not allowed to move without a male escort. I had to cover myself to go and speak to the Houthis to negotiate access so the trucks could go to deliver assistance. So there is also a need to understand the cultural nuances. If I had gone to the Houthis wearing like this, it would be disrespectful. I didn't speak the language. So I think even the negotiations you have to unpack depending on the context. I would also say, you mentioned technology and data and how it can be used. One of the biggest challenges we are seeing in the sector is also misinformation and disinformation, where technology is actually being used, for example, to say the UN is doing this and we are not doing it, and we cannot keep pace with some of the misinformation that is out there. So we've had to develop a very robust communication plan and campaign to counter misinformation, especially in the age of social media. It's becoming very, very difficult. The question about mobilized resources, it's a very critical one. You have to engage with all, because you have to start from the resources that come from taxpayers. So I'm here in Japan, I have to think about how does a Japanese taxpayer think about overseas development assistance. Starting from there, then go to the parliament, as I will go this afternoon to speak, to go to the ministries, to mobilize resources, but also to communicate what are we doing with the taxpayers' money. How are we aligning what we are trying to do with, for example, Japanese priorities, hence the importance of strategic dialogue with different, and every country is different. But then also sometimes pushing back on national interest, because part of my job as a UN staff is to protect the international integrity space.
So, Murasa, maybe would you share, what you have been working with many resources on the OCHA as well?
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'm afraid JICA is not, the JDR is not eligible to make this kind of presentation. We are very late coming the digitalization. We remain always in the analog world normally. But we are trying to do our activities on the basis of digitalization day after day. And I'd like to, so hearing the presentation that Sumie Sensei made some minutes before, AI technology is great. That will solve all of the problems we have solved. I imagined this kind of thing, but I'm not in utopianism. We are in a realistic world at this moment. It is very difficult what is happening on the ground. It is very, very difficult to visualize or to make quantitative data what's happening in the ground. That is a very, very big challenge. As I mentioned, JDR, our activities are limited to the natural disaster response, but we are asked in some case to support for the conflict issues, the problem, the crisis, and so on, because we have outstanding the competency in the data management, especially for the disaster medicine. So I'd like to make a small presentation. I think one of my colleagues here, she was involved in this activity since more than 1 year. She was assigned to Egypt to help this support activities of the WHO, World Health Organization. The coordination cell was set up in Cairo at that moment. So I'd like to show you a little bit some example of our activities. So I call it the information management support on the treatment, medical treatment data in the disaster medicine. So that this is an example of the Gaza Strip in Palestine. Already at 14 months or the 15 months, the conflict continued. So from the beginning, we are asked by the WHO to bring some support to mobilize this kind of methodology in the Gaza Strip. Because once the disaster or the crisis strike on the region, it's very difficult, as I said, to know what is happening. So once the disaster or the crisis strike, so many emergency medical team they go into those areas to provide some support for the affected people and so on. But those activities are fragmented, so we cannot know how many patients, what kind of attribution, what kind of change of the phase that we can observe. So, nobody can know without any without instruction of this kind of support. So the Japanese medical team of the Japan disaster relief team. So we have a lot of the experience in the world of the disaster assistance, and as well in Japan, even in Japan, we have so many disaster we have experience. Through those experience, we have developed this kind of methodology. So this is the dashboard. You can easily access on the website so that you can know simultaneously what's happening in the Gaza Strip in aspect of the medical field with quantitative data. So you can see, for example, this is the date, how, in which period, how many patients that we can know. So it counts already more than 2 million patients that EMT has already treated. Because the population of the Gaza Strip is about 2 million already, so a great number of the people that supported the activities by different EMT. And of course, the digital mapping, and we can know the quantitative data, how many patients, and how many consultations have been done, and the weekly tendency by under 5 years patients, how many, and vulnerable people, or conflict-induced treatment, how many patients were treated, and so we can know exactly what is happening through this system. So what we are doing, so many EMTs are deploying in the Gaza Strip. So we asked them to send a report daily or the weekly to the JICA the support group based in Japan, not in the Gaza Strip nor the Egypt. So the JICA team analyze it and verify it and do the compile to summable the quantity. And finally, we made this database. That is the base of this dashboard. And those figure is used by decision maker of, for example, the WHO or the assistant partners and so on. And those figures is published through the situation report weekly or monthly, so that we can contribute also the advocation and so on. That's what we are now doing. So the key point, one is this support is remote from Japan. So that beyond the time and the space and the time differential, we can continue to support the crisis, the very serious crisis from Japan, not the presence in the Gaza Strip. Secondly, it is very difficult to maintain this system. For example, the digitalization, that is a big risk. But in Gaza Strip, the Israeli authority cut off all of the internet connection. We cannot access it. So that we asked the EMT team at the beginning to write down on the paper and take a picture and attach it in the SMS message to send to Japan, passing by the telephone line. And so this kind of activity, this is very, very analog system, you know. And thirdly, even if we do, we say remote the support, at the beginning, it is very, very difficult to access, to contact with them, with coordination cell of WHO, so that we send a team at the beginning to make contact with our counter personnel of WHO as well as the EMT, which those are in the Gaza Strip, passing by Cairo always, so that we can make a trust, the relationship face to face, so that this system work well. I'd like to say digitalization and face to face contact. So we have to be a hybrid always. The mission to the Egypt, her departure was 1st of January, isn't it? Last year. So that was a very memorable mission for us. But anyway, that we continue even today this kind of support. So the ceasefire agreement was done. So we see the alleged surge period that the many of the EMT consider to go into the Gaza Strip at this moment. We are now in the preparation. Sorry to a little bit long, but that is we are now doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Altogether, what I learned is from ASG, I think the human spirits to support those who are in trouble is very important, and keep human dignity and commitment. but then the technology as innovation is moving on. But finally, Imran-san said this interface of human to human interface and the technology, digitalization, that is essential. So on foundation of this commitment to the common goods and technology must be applied, and still, the technology should be applied in the context of a kind of human to human sort of interface. Right. So now, sorry that we have a really short time, but I'd like to have a conversation. If you don't have, if you have any questions, raise your hand. And if you are not confident about speaking English, of course, it's okay to speak in Japanese. But about working for the international organization, about technology, what about the emergency relief, any question, any type of questions. Yes,
thank you for a very valuable lectures and discussion. I'm Kyotaro Seki, undergraduate student studying international relations in Hitotsubashi University. My question is about the kind of a dilemma in humanitarian systems what I found recently. In a higher political stage, there are politicians, there are diplomats negotiating, making decisions, and their decision can stop the war. They start the war, but they can't stop the war. They have power to make a huge difference. But on the other hand, on the ground, there are people working to help affected people who are suffering in front of them. And it can be limited in terms of the amount of people they can help, but they are definitely making some kind of difference in other lives. But they don't have power to stop the war. So they can help 1 or 10 or 100 people, but they cannot prevent thousands or tens of thousands of people from suffering, like the fundamental goals. So my question is, why I'm asking this question is I'm considering to work in the United Nations in the future, and I'm interested in the humanitarian system. So how do you find such a dilemma, or how do you face to such a question? Thank you.
Should I take maybe 2 questions or
Sure.
so? Yeah.
Okay.
Or 3?
So maybe take 1 more or 2. Anybody? Please.
Hi, thank you very much for your great, inspiring, presentations. I was very encouraged to listen to your, presentation. I have a question about.
Should I identify yourself?
Oh yeah, sure. My name is Aki Suzuki. I am working for a global trust fund hosted by the World Bank, and I am doing advocacy. And yeah, my question is the usage of the geographical information to prepare for the natural disaster or any other, humanitarian crisis. I'm always curious, who has the right of the information? The nation has it, or the people living on the land has the right to use? It's kind of a, privacy, or or some militarily sensitive issue, like it's related to people's life. It's also related to the country's some military activities, and it can be very sensitive problem. And do UN organization have any special contract to each member states that they can use to use those digital information, or geographical information? And that's my very pure question about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If not, so then can I ask you to respond to the first question?
Yes. Thank you. I didn't get your name. But yes. Thank you. Thank you for a great question. The dilemma you mentioned, it's a dilemma, it's a frustration, but also it's coupled with hope. I started off by saying that the United Nations have 190 some members. What you said, you're absolutely right. Most of the conflicts actually are man-made and they can be stopped by man or women. I mean, I'm generalizing. There are different levels of powers. There are countries that are extremely powerful that can actually stop. I've never been a politician, but I know politicians are driven by different incentives. Could be elections, it could be different constituencies that they serve, and sometimes they make different choices based on the domestic politics. But having said that, Gaza, give you a specific example, because Gaza, even Ukraine, it really divided the world. What gives me hope, and I hope you will explore a job or opportunity in international development. Take my own experience. I joined OCHA 6 days before the Ukraine war started, and I thought, my God, the world is collapsing. Yeah, that was Ukraine. Fast forward now, we've been dealing with a lot, Gaza being the most recent. But what gives me hope is when I go to Security Council and advocate for exactly the people you said on the ground who are suffering, and sometimes even calling those nations that are not taking actions in public. So if you think about if there was no United Nations, there was no Security Council, who would actually advocate for people who are suffering? I think the second point I would add is there's a lot of behind-the-scenes diplomacy that does not get reported in the news. I'll give you a specific example. When Russia invaded Ukraine, my former boss then, and the Secretary General, were negotiating with the Russians, with the Ukrainians, with the Turkish, to avail a global food crisis, because Ukraine is a food basket. So there was something that was born out of very quiet diplomacy called the Black Sea Grain Initiative, where ships were actually allowed to move products, agriculture products. But what was happening behind the scenes, I knew, you did not know because it did not make the news, and it was very sensitive. Even negotiating who goes and monitors what goes into the ship. So there's a lot of that. Even in Gaza, it was horrible. I mean, horrible seeing what was happening. But frankly, we were also talking to Washington, we were talking to IDF, we were talking to COGAT. So actually the trucks could go in. So that's what, for me, shifts the balance from dilemma to hope. That at least I'm trying to do something. And I would feel horrible if I did not do anything. So I think it goes back to the point professors say, the human factor, the negotiating factor, even Japan helped us on certain things in Gaza, but you would never see them in the news because maybe Japan government asked that we should not disclose, for example.
Thank you very much. So maybe we should respond to the second question.
Yes, thank you for the question. So remote sensing, looking from the sky, right? It's open space. I mean, there's a whole field of the International Space Corporation and the international law governing the Space Corporation. But just like the remote sensing, when it comes to those like mapping, it's open space. It's the matter of resolution, like how much you can see. So the military aircraft can see much better than commercial aircraft because they have better capabilities and so forth. And the imagery is not available to us. So the imagery that we use, the UN or humanitarian aid agencies or the academic institutions for analysis, it's open. It's public source. We buy from Google Earth. I mean, Google Earth is free for charge, so we get it from Google Earth. The more focused professional people, they purchase mainly from the US, the European space companies. But here's a catch, right? Because it's commercial and because large companies control quite a bit of the Space Corporation, one of them sitting close to the White House at the moment. So there is a huge disparity when it comes to access. Those who can pay more have better information, even in space. But having said that, there's quite a lot we can do with open source, the publicly available information, and there's no reason not to use it. So that's a really quick answer to the question. I really like Kyoto's question. I think that really, it's the dilemma for anyone who is in an international organizations or aspiring to get into international organizations. I spent 15 years in the UN Department of Peace Operations before coming to Hitotsubashi 3 years ago, and I was covering Darfur, and I would grind my teeth in the Security Council, looking at those people who are making statements, and if they really want to resolve it, this wins. But instead, peacekeepers, escorting the displaced people for like 10, 15 years. How is that an economically more efficient? How is that the good use of resources? However, we can only choose what we do individually. And I am glad myself to be able to see both the council chamber and operations on the ground. So if you're thinking about international careers, again, I think you go with that eyes wide open, as the secretary said, right? Empathy and willingness to see both sides of the story.
Yes, and also on top of that, I think if you face such challenges, you get really angry, and I'm sometimes very much frustrated about UN Security Council decision on various issues related to peace and security. But I think we shouldn't stop just by getting angry, right? Then how we are going to overcome this challenge, and I think that's kind of a place where we have our innovation in policy-wise and of course technology-wise, and that's why we try to keep on challenging how to make it better. Right? For example, in my case, no proliferation, and we are always facing the problems of Iran, North Korea, and some resolutions are blocked by certain countries, the Security Council. Then what can we do to reduce nuclear threats? Instead of seeking this pathway, you may have another way. And how are we going to convince those who are not going to support this particular resolutions? So, of course, the process is slow and frustrating, but I think if you have a kind of commitment, maybe you are able to keep on working on that. I don't know. I'm a bit too optimistic. I don't know.
No, I think you're right, because to be honest, sometimes there were days when I go to Security Council, I'm just thinking, God, what am I doing, But there are also days where you hear, say, Secretary General asking the right questions whether the Security Council is up to date with the current world. So at least now there are conversations about reforming the Security Council. There are observers, Japan was in the Security Council. So you work with certain countries that can influence others. But I think for me what gives me hope is the action on the ground. I think as colleagues say, you put it very nicely, combining the operations and really see, in Gaza we have OCHA over 80 staff. I remember one staff who has lost 85% of her family, and every day she showed up to work, a surgeon. And the OCHA staff globally voted her to be the staff of the year because she was so selfless to bury her own pain to serve others. And she didn't have the luxury like international staff to leave. So for me, colleagues like her give me hope. Say, you know what, let me just go and do the minimum I can do, the maximum I can do to help.
Yeah, I think it's easy to just, kind of to get disappointed with what the international organization is doing. But I think, there is no alternatives to the international organizations who are seriously working for the kind of common goods, also common good, or those who are working, those who are suffering on the ground. So, I think now under the very intense sort of, strategic competitions between major powers, but still, I think, not despite of that, but because of that, I think more of our international organizations getting more and more important, right? So, any other questions? And of course, some of you are expecting to have more kind of discussion technology. So now I'm happy to take these questions as well.
Maybe I can ask a question because I wanted to ask as well.
Thank you for all your words. My name is Jonathan Chong. I am an MBA student in Hitotsubashi, and I always was thinking about business technology and how does it connect, or why does it not connect good enough with the humanitarian and the social value and all the other things? Just looking into this, my question would be really simple. I was looking into all the technologies you showed and explained, and how JICA also explained that how they utilize some of them. If there's technology and we should use them, I'm not saying that I'm sure JICA does a lot and tries their best, but like, why is there a lag in the technology usage, or what is the limitation, and how do we look into technology? Like, should we use it? How do we use it? And like, well, about AI, there are all these discussions about it's legal or not, and what's the right way to use it. Like, what kind of barriers, limitations, and are they something that we should break through, or we should do step by step? Like, how do you look into technology? Like, I just want a point of view. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It is very difficult to reply your question correctly and adequately at this moment, because we have no limitation, we have no restriction to develop the digitalized technology into our operation. But our main activity is to provide the services, for example, urban search and rescue, to find the person who is under the rubble, how we can secure the safe, the right person under the rubble and so on. So we mobilize, for example, the rescuers from firefighter and Coast Guard and the policemen in Japan and so on. So they try to find and remove all of the rubbles to find to save the victims. That is principal activities for the rescue team. Medical team also. Our main activity is to provide the medical service, including the hospitalization or the operation and so on. If necessary, and if that is very practical, we can adapt some digitalized technology into our operation. But in this big picture, what the Sumi said presented, that is with new technology, she will find a new frontier out of our humanitarian activities. But what we are doing is a very traditional thing. But last thing we have to do is the service by a person. So where we are now working. So that's why I said a little bit before, sorry to bring you down to the ground. That is the reality. But if, as you, a talented person, concerning digitalizing technology, that will change significantly our activities. So one example I presented, that I am support, that is the very advanced methodology in the world, at least in the emergency medical team and so on. We gradually develop and introduce those kind of technology into our activities, but in developing stage. Thank you very much for your attention.
And I have to be very frank with you. If you find data on the amount of investment for the weaponization of digital technology or the emerging tech, and the amount of the money which would be invested to the disaster relief, in digitalization and disaster relief, then you will find the place where we have to have a breakthrough. It's actually time to close, but before closing the session, instead of me summarizing the discussion, maybe can I ask ASG to give a kind of your sort of final take?
Thanks. Thank you, Professor. Wow. I think maybe, actually I wanted to ask a question, but I was more curious because, you know, in the United Nations we are seeing less and less interest, at least in the humanitarian sector, of young Japanese applicants. So I was actually curious for those who are in the room who are not considering, for example, a Korean international organization, just to be curious why, because you that's more the feedback for us because we're trying to understand. But on the closing, I think 2 or 3 things. One is I have always believed that complacency is the beginning of stagnation. And it's very easy when we live in our own context, and especially beautiful context like Japan, to sometimes forget that universities, institutions like this developed industry leaders. I was looking last night as part of my research, the alumni, people who have come and gone through this academic, and they've left a mark. So especially for young generation, you have the advantage of being business industry leaders, technology leaders. You asked very good questions on data information management. That's the future of the world. That's the humanitarian 2.0. So really I would encourage you to think about doing things that make you very uncomfortable, but leverage technology to actually make a difference. Things that make you nervous, push yourself. When I came to Asia, I was really worried, would I be able to leave to find a place, language different, food is different. But I've become where I am because of that. I think 2 is, don't take for granted what you have. I used to take for granted, and I grew up in very modest Tanzania, but I used to take it for granted things like peace. We never had wars. And then now, 30 years later and traveling, I said, my goodness, just overnight, and I've seen countries, things change. Look at Lebanon, look at other places. So really appreciate the investments, the tears, the sweats that others have given you as a foundation, and think about your own legacy. What would be the legacy that you would like to leave for the next generation? So those would be my 2 points, but especially doing things that make you uncomfortable. Push yourself. It's like going to the gym, that treadmill, and you are hurting, but when you finish, you're going to feel good, and it's good for you. So don't do the easy things. That would be my advice.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much all 3 speakers. I really enjoyed our discussion and wanted to continue, but I think you have another appointment, right? So I have to stop here. But also, I thank you for coming over, and so hopefully our center is going to have more sessions.